Witam Państwa serdecznie na takim naszym już trzecim webinarium w tym roku, który organizujemy razem ze SmartBear. Dzisiaj skupimy się na tematyce automatyzacji testów UI i maksymalizacji wyciągania korzyści z naszej inwestycji poprzez ciągłe testowanie. Ja nazywam się Michał Schubert, zajmuję się sprzedażą i doradztwem w temacie wyboru rozwiązań informatycznych u dystrybutora w firmie Connect Distribution, a także jest z nami Michael Flaherty, Solutions Engineer z firmy SmartBear. Mamy na dzisiaj przewidzianą taką agendę, także na początek opowiemy sobie kilka słów o dystrybutorze Connect Distribution, a także przedstawimy firmę SmartBear. Tą częścią zajmę się ja. Następnie będzie prezentacja rozwiązania oraz live demo produktu i tą część poprowadzi Michael Flaherty od SmartBeara. Ta część odbędzie się także w języku angielskim. A na koniec mam nadzieję, że będzie owocna sesja Q&A. Firma Connect Distribution, jesteśmy dystrybutorem VAD, Value Added Distributor, z wartością dodaną, czyli mamy wiedzę ekspercką, którą możemy wykorzystywać, aby pomóc Państwu w przypadku np. wdrożeń, szkoleń czy różnego rodzaju webinariów. Działamy w 4 obszarach, tak jak bezpieczeństwo sieciowe, storage i wirtualizację, narzędzia deweloperskie i systemy operacyjne i baza danych. Ta część bezpieczeństwa, jak widzicie Państwo, jest dosyć mocno oblegana w rozwiązania. Mamy tu szereg narzędzi, między innymi właśnie do bezpiecznego resetu haseł, zarządzania kluczami szyfrującymi, do bezpiecznego dostępu do zasobów sieciowych, do bezpiecznej wymiany danych z takich sieci wyizolowanych w różnych organizacjach, które mają takie swoje sieci wewnętrzne odcięte od internetu, narzędzia do skanowania infrastruktury i oprogramowania zarówno w ujęciu właśnie z urządzeń fizycznych, typu serwery, stacje robocze i poszukiwania podatności, jak i także takie skanery podatności w ujęciu na aplikacji webowych, czyli poszukiwanie po prostu. To miejsc, w których mogą się właśnie hakerzy złamać, zhakować na aplikację i wygrać dane. Mamy także narzędzia antyspamowe, narzędzia do monitoringu infrastruktury, narzędzia do zarządzania uprawnieniami w organizacji, czyli zarządzania PAM-owskie, różnego rodzaju firewall, także firewall aplikacji webowych, czyli Web Application Firewall od Barracudy, ochronę poczty, czy też fajne narzędzia także do bezpiecznego i kontrolowanego przesyłania plików między systemami, pracownikami czy partnerami handlowymi. Tutaj w części storage'owej tutaj mamy to rozwiązania są wszystko software'owe, także między innymi hiperkonwergentne centra danych, narzędzia do wirtualizacji pamięci masowych, narzędzia do wirtualizacji aplikacji typu VDI czy wirtualizacji środowiska Windows w systemie Mac, narzędzia zarządzania wydrukami i drukarkami w dużych, rozproszonych środowiskach, a także ciekawe narzędzia typu Disaster Recovery, czyli do przywracania danych, takie tworzenia punktów dostępowych, do których możemy wrócić w przypadku jakiejś awarii. A mamy także też szereg narzędzi deweloperskich. O SmartBearze, który tam jest jednym z tych logotypów, które Państwo widzicie, powiemy sobie za chwilę więcej. Tu mamy jeszcze narzędzia JetBrainsa, czyli środowiska do pisania kodu w różnych językach programowania, tak zwane IDE, a także narzędzia do pracy grupowej typu issue trackery, czy narzędzia typu Continuous Integration. Ciekawym też rozwiązaniem tutaj dla Państwa, dla grup takich roboczych, tworzących projekty informatyczne są też właśnie dosyć ostatnio modny temat konteneryzacji i tutaj mamy też narzędzia do zarządzania tymi kontenerami, tak zwany orkestrator kontenerów od Ranchera, a także narzędzia do tworzenia wersji instalacyjnych, czy takiej finalnej pracy tworzenia software'u i tworzenia już wersji instalacyjnej dla różnych systemów później operacyjnych wykorzystywanych przez klientów. No i ostatni logotyp to jest Mind Manager. To jest bardzo rozbudowane narzędzie do mapy myśli, czyli takiego graficznego rozrysowywania sobie pomysłów, różnych dróg dojścia, do burz mózgów, a także tutaj coś ciekawego, dodanych zostało szereg narzędzi, które umożliwiają właśnie tworzenie projektów, zarządzanie projektami i zasobami ludzkimi zaangażowanymi w ten projekt. A w części systemów operacyjnych baz danych mamy reprezentację MySQL, Oracle, SUSE, a także też wspomnę, że także mamy w ofercie Red Hata, także jeśli ktoś by poszukiwał tego systemu operacyjnego. Dobrze, przejdźmy sobie teraz do SmartBeara. Narzędzia SmartBear są, można powiedzieć, synonimem jakości w całym takim software development lifecycle, zarówno począwszy od planowania, projektowania, testowania czy monitorowania. Firma została założona w roku 2009 w Bostonie. Obecnie ma 12 globalnych biur, między innymi w Ameryce Północnej, Europie, Azji i Australii. Ja tutaj przygotowałem jeszcze takich ciekawych właśnie ostatnich informacji z kilku miesięcy. Właśnie między innymi jest ta akwizycja firmy Bugsnag, która miała szereg narzędzi do monitorowania błędów czy stabilności aplikacji. Teraz ta funkcjonalność jest wykorzystywana w rozwiązaniach SmartBeara. Ciekawostką jest też, że platforma Ready API dodała wsparcie testowania dla popularnej platformy strumieniowania zdarzeń Apache Kafka, a także rozwiązanie Swagger Hub, czyli do tworzenia, projektowania API. Zdobyło szereg nagród, m.in. nagrodę Davis Award na Developer Week w tym roku, a także nagrodę IoT Development Tool of the Year przez IoT Breakthrough, taką organizację. No i ciekawostką też jest to, że SmartBear drugi rok z rzędu w tym roku dostał nagrodę za jedno z najlepszych miejsc pracy w Bostonie w Ameryce. Firma zdobyła zaufanie zarówno dużych, średnich, małych firm we wszystkich sektorach gospodarki. Tak jak widzicie, mamy tutaj technologie, różne serwisy finansowe, banki, edukację, wytwarzanie różnych produkcji. Tutaj chcę też powiedzieć, że to są wszystkie instytucje, firmy, które się zgodziły być takimi klientami referencyjnymi. Natomiast chciałbym powiedzieć też, że w przypadku tych wszystkich działów gospodarki można by to spokojnie wymienić polskimi logotypami polskich odbiorców i firm wykorzystujących narzędzia SmartBeara. Natomiast w naszym kraju niestety jesteśmy dosyć jeszcze nieśmiali, jeśli chodzi o chwalenie się i bycie takimi klientami referencyjnymi. Także po prostu w przypadku takiej prywatnej rozmowy można sobie o tym wspomnieć, natomiast oficjalnie niestety nie. Firma także jest zaangażowana w narzędzia open source, także nie zapomina o tej społeczności, community i dostarcza 3 darmowe narzędzia, w tym szalenie popularne narzędzia open source'owe typu Swagger, właśnie do projektowania API, typu narzędzie SOAP UI do testowania API, a także narzędzia do rozwoju sterowanego zachowaniem, Behavior Driven Development. Tak chcę powiedzieć, że misją SmartBear jest bycie takim pierwszym wyborem dla zespołów programistycznych każdej wielkości poprzez dostarczanie właśnie narzędzi, które natychmiast będą wpływać na tworzenie takich aplikacji jutra. Narzędzia SmartBeara są zbudowane w celu usprawnienia procesów obejmujących automatyzację testów, cykl życia API, współpracę, testowanie wydajności, zarządzanie testami i wiele innych funkcjonalności. Czyli SmartBear pracuje reasumując nad całym cyklem życia oprogramowania, tak jak zapewnić klientom szybsze dostarczanie wysokiej jakości software'u. SmartBear uzyskał także uznanie wśród klientów. Efektem tego są wysokie pozycje w takich organizacjach sprawdzających różne rozwiązania w branży, tak jak Forrester czy Gartner. Także jak Państwo widzicie, w przypadku tego magicznego kwadratu Gartnera, SmartBear jest absolutnym liderem, jeśli chodzi o dziedziny zautomatyzacji testów. I wskazuje na to właśnie ciągły wzrost klientów, ciągły wzrost zadowolonych klientów i bardzo pozytywne opinie o produktach. Także z mojej strony to już będzie wszystko. Także zapraszam teraz do części takiej technicznej, którą poprowadzi Michael Flaherty, Solutions Engineer ze SmartBear.
Okay, so thanks for that, Michael. Yeah, so just a quick agenda on what we're going to cover here today. As I said, I'm Michael Flaherty. I'm based in the Galway office in the west of Ireland, which is the SmartBear office for EMEA. I'm going to cover an overview and maybe a context of why you should look at automating your UI tests, your functional tests, how to write robust UI tests that will get you to the root of your workflows and are valuable to your testing process quite quickly. How we can fit those UI tests into CI/CD pipelines, so how we can create maybe test packs and executable items that we can run in CI/CD, whether that's scheduled or triggered, and how to generate helpful bug reports that help you resolve any issues that are found quite quickly. So getting to the root of the issues and resolving those issues quickly. And then we'll go through a demo of the application test complete, which showing a workflow of creating some simple workflow, maybe do some data-driven testing, and then creating our executable items that we can run through our CI/CD and how we can run through that. I'll show an example in Jenkins, and if anybody wants to see an example in Azure, we can cover that if we have time also. So what does ROI mean to you, really, is kind of the first question anybody is thinking of when they're looking at automation, right? So it can mean several things depending on your team, and these really are unique to any individual team. You would need to categorize these. So whether you want, if you're struggling with downtime, if you're having bugs creep up regularly, if you want to increase the frequency of your releases, better quality is a kind of a catch-all term. But if you are able to monitor the quality of your system, by which I mean where you have automated responses which give you feedback, and I like to say a phrase a manager gave to me once, a great phrase: a failing test is always telling you something about your system, whether it looks like the test should have passed, or it is a flaky test, or what have you, whether depending on what framework you have. It's always telling you something about your system, and it's a reflection of the quality of your system. So to have that quite quickly and to do that with automation is the best route towards that. You can increase your test coverage, so to increase the coverage across the functionality and the workloads of your system to get that feedback fast. And you can reduce your infrastructure cost, so you can quickly identify where maybe certain dependencies lie that can be removed, or maybe where things need to be invested in to increase that quality. Any of these items, there's the basic project principle of SMART, S-M-A-R-T, where there's items can be small, measurable, assignable, realistic, and timed, so you can quickly categorize and have metrics that you can measure against as you progress through your automation. In SmartBear, we like to talk about this concept of shifting left. It's commonly talked concept these days in testing and automation. So as you can see with the graph here, the diagram, according to Jones and Capers in this study, 85% of defects are introduced obviously in the coding stage, but where they're found is quite important. Whether it's found in the minimum amount of found in the coding stage, some in the unit test stage, some in the functional test stage, and some more in the system test or integration stage, and hopefully very, very few in the release stage. But the impact of those defects is massive. But if you find them early, it costs very little to repair those, get them back into your workflows and push the build out. But as you progress through your SDLC and you have, say, you catch these in your functional, your integration, or your release stage, the cost is a lot higher. Why? It takes longer. It takes more time. It takes more effort. It takes resources. It takes individuals, people, and their time, which costs money to fix these issues. And the study found at the system integration test stage, it could be 40 times. In the release stage, it could be up to 600 times, because at that stage, you're dealing with possibly external stakeholders, external users, and you're trying to keep those happy while also maybe dealing with downtime or a defect that needs to be fixed. By shifting left, so you see by the orange line, by shifting this line back where it's right after the coding stage, you can have an automation test suite which is running and gives you instant, well, more or less instant feedback. Whether it's a unit test, functional test, system test stage, you're reducing that cost massively and reducing your liability. You can also, by introducing it further left, whether it's at the API stage through virtualization of APIs or functional tests, having exposure to the developers, having some form of maybe BDD or TDD, test-driven development. You can introduce the testing earlier at the coding stage and having the developers maybe run tests or access to those tests on a regular basis and reduce the number of defects that are even checked into the builds. So why automate? Overall, you want faster release cycles, but it's not speed for the sake of speed, right? In the earlier days of, and still today in web software development, where we had purely waterfall models and it was purely manual testing, or any teams now that are using purely manual testing methods, the tests take a long time. So this graph you can see on the left-hand side, it measures by time in terms of weeks. So where you have low automation capability and you're using manual testing, your automation and your resources are quite high. Okay, your reliance on those are quite high. But as you progress through to an early agile stages where you are using some automation and you're reducing your time, you still have an overhead of time and resources that you need to use up on your testing stages. So by using robust automation tools, and you get to more of an agile stage where you're able to quickly feedback, catch your defects earlier, and fix them earlier. Having robust tools that need less maintenance, you're getting into that early agile stage. And then you get to the continuous testing stage, and you're in a continuous DevOps cycle where you're able to quickly release the build, test the build, get feedback on that build, and decide whether or not it's a release candidate, whether you want to automate that workflow from check-in right through to release or to a testing stage or deployment stage, what have you. What does that mean for your business goals? Well, you increase your speed, right? You have your faster cycles, but increase the speed of feedback. That improves the quality. Your team knows the quality, knows the state of your whole system quite quickly and can report on that quite quickly and act on things quite quickly. It reduces your costs because maybe you'll have less resources that you need to use to find those issues, to have that confidence in the product and the certification of the product that you want to release. It also improves your culture because your culture of innovation, your culture of your teams are going to be happier, basically. I know myself from my previous career as a QE automation engineer, when you're working through regression cycles for a major release and you're hitting issues after issues after issues and you're just running tests, maintaining tests, you're at the stage here where you see the second stage of the bulky automation tools or the robust tools. It's a huge overhead and you don't have time to think about anything else. So your creativity and your innovation is stifled, right? And your teams are under pressure and generally basically very unhappy. So these UI tests in our third and fourth stage that we pointed out there, they can be challenging to create and automate, right? For many reasons that we see here. You may have dynamic IDs. If you're a web application or any kind of application, really, you could have IDs that are changing as you're building up your functionality, you're releasing new functionality, new objects are being created or being maintained. You mean to maintain the test scripts. You could have your growing test suite where you need to update tests as functionality changes, logic changes, workflows, happy paths, they change all the time. You can have changing object properties. So if you're using object properties, things like CSS or XPath locators, different locators to use for your recognition, whatever framework you're using, they can change, they need to be maintained, and that takes resources and time. So we're funneling down through kind of a funnel of how we can focus our time. You may use things like certain frameworks use XY coordinates, but these can break very easily. You can run your tests in a different machine and suddenly your tests don't work as reliably. Your team may be non-technical. If you're moving from manual testing into automation testing, oftentimes there can be a requirement to be more technical, to have scripting expertise. Your team may not have that, and that will take upskilling or even hiring. And there can be increased complexity in technology for the application. Suddenly your team is going from manual testing and they're being asked to maybe test unit tests, review unit tests, maybe add API layer tests, different added complexity for people to have to pick up and to do. And then we compress when we get to that stage, that maturity of having some layer of automation, we want to progress to CI/CD, where we're not looking at manually running our tests, but we can feed it through an automation cycle. So as I said, it's a decision of how we want to break down our delivery cycle. CI/CD, whoever you ask, it's continuous integration, and it can be either continuous delivery or continuous deployment. You can see here as the cycle goes through, we have continuous integration, continuous delivery. You have a stage where you can automate your stages through a CI/CD tool like Jenkins or Azure, TeamCity. where you have a check-in stage. You can automate your steps from build, unit testing, through your testing stages, and then cut off at your release management, where maybe a human person will decide the certification stage of releasing that build or deploying to prod or not. Or you can have your continuous deployment model where you fully automate, and you can have a completely hands-off method of trusting your test, have some layer of certification to trust your tests and request it through your release cycle and your deployment. Obviously, this will also depend on the industry you're in. You know, if you're working in certain regulated, highly regulated industries like finance or insurance, things like that, medicine, you'll always have to have a certain level of interaction with this. It maybe couldn't be possibly fully automated, but the dream is there to go to the fully automated deployment stage. What are our benefits for leveraging CI/CD then? You can see quite quickly. You can imagine, whoops, apologies. You know, you can increase your user customer satisfaction. So, you know, first off, you're preventing, if you're automating, you're preventing any defects from getting out. But if there's some bug leakage or some feature leakage that comes out, you can quickly respond to that, right? You're fully automating your workflow, and you can respond to any customer, you have a large customer query.
Szkolenie. Zautomatyzować.
I'm sorry, there's someone that is on mute there, if you don't mind. Thanks. You can have your faster releases, so you have our faster release cycles. You can spend time on other business codes. So your teams are allowed to be freed up and work on creativity. You can create further roadmaps, more interesting epics, right? You can add, you know, more interesting and relevant functionality. You can reduce your risk. So as I say, you can reduce your risk of defects being leaked out, and you can respond to them quite quickly. You're pushing back on the release cycle, area of the cycle to test and get that feedback. And you have your transparency across your teams. You have a set process that is transparent. Your teams can see it. It can be reported on. You can see what was released and when, and there is a log that goes through all that. And by automating, you reduce your need for resources. You can lower your costs, lower your dependencies. Okay. Finally, generating bug reports, right? So the whole point I've mentioned several times of having this automation is to get to any potential bugs faster and to have that instant feedback and to deal with that. But to deal with a bug report from a QA or a development standpoint, you need to have actionable items, right? Where you have some good detail that you can work with. So a typical bug reporting process involves several steps, where a new bug is discovered by a user and the bug report's written up. Bugs assigned to a developer with a priority. Developer fixes the bug, it's reassigned to a tester for verification that is squashed. Tester verifies the bug is fixed or reopens the bug that exists, and the process repeats, right? The process of creating the reports can seem straightforward, but it can grow complex in a fast-paced environment. So if you're a very fast-paced environment with a lot of functionality coming out every sprint, maybe, you know, it can be hard to track them, and duplicate bug reports can be a frequent problem, okay? By passing through a standardized process, we can see, you know, developers can see what bugs are responsible for, testers can see what bugs are responsible for, reproduce them, have the good information, dive into the problem, find a solution, and quickly turn them around, right? And the result is more bugs closed, more bugs found, more bugs closed per unit of time, and higher quality software, right? Key to the success is writing the clear bug reports that are well organized. So what should be in your bug reports that you're working with? Obviously, a title, so a concise summary, a short summary of where it occurred, some visual proof would be useful, a screenshot or a video that can be worked with for debugging. Expected versus actual, so clarity on what was expected to be there versus what was actually happening. So you can see, you know, clarity on what the requirements are. Steps to reduce, well-defined steps to reproduce, no ambiguity, completely cuts down your time and stops wasting time, so kind of back and forth that is needed between people, reducing calls. You know, what extra things like what environment they were in, what kind of browser maybe for web testing, operating system, ratio, zoom, things like that, resolution. Any console logs can be useful for any other dependencies, maybe third-party tools are causing any issues with your applications. Source URL for a bug if there's a bug log, or even a URL for a web application. And severity and priority, so people can organize and see what they should be working on at a certain time. So in summary, before we get to our demonstration, define what ROI categories are important to you. So what do you want to get out of your automation? What are your pain points right now? And how do you want to address them? How will you measure them as they are solved, hopefully? Decide what test cases, what workflows are you going to automate? When you're talking about functional testing, you're always talking about workflows. You're talking about your path through your application that are maybe, if you're doing manual testing now, you'll have test cases that are repetitive. People are maybe using the same test cases again and again. Your core workflows, your critical workflows, things that are complex, things that are, they take time to do manually, but can be automated quite quickly. They're time consuming. Create automated tests or robust tests that are resistant to change the UI. This is down to tooling. We can show examples of this in our application. Again, shift left, test early, test often. Right? Have tests that can be run quickly, and in a short period of time, you have feedback that you can work on. You can leverage CI/CD tools to automate where possible, and prioritize your platforms, devices relevant to your user base. What are your users using? They're your core workflows. So you get to those first. You get your core user kind of paths first, and then you spread out from that to your edge cases. And then you work on your reports, your bug reports that are actionable, any of your logs, they're actionable and standardized. So that's my short presentation. We'll get to demonstration. So yes, and you should be able to see my screen now in test complete. So this is test complete. This is our functional testing application. This is what you see if you download our trials, for example. This is what you'll see straight away. In our trial, you'll have full access to all our functionality. So when you open the application, you'll have some access to some basic tools. So you can record a test straight away, or you can create a new project. You can open an existing project, and you can work on some samples that we have. There's also links to our documentation. And I always like to point out our community. We just recently hit 100,000 members. It's very active and it's very useful it's got a great search functionality for anyone starting out with test complete. And we're all quite active on it. The engineers and the help desk are quite active on this too. Okay. So to start a new project, and you give the project a name, you give it a location, and this can be linked to a repository. We can integrate with source control tools like Git, GitHub, Torch SVN, Subversion. You need to select a scripting language, but you don't need to use scripting during test complete. It's just important in the project setup. You can create one or more projects. We can get to that shortly. But when you start a project, you will need to define a scripting language. So test complete can initialize the IDE. So if you record your tests, say, and you want to convert them or use any code expressions during them, you would have to select this ahead of time. And this can't be changed per project, but you can create subsequent projects. So we can support JavaScript, Python, and VB script out of the box there. Okay. We have some optional configuration items here. So we're there for web testing. That's relevant to our demo now. We use XPath and CSS selectors. So this allows us to run the same test application. This machine, there's no machine dependency. These are web standards that can be used across different platforms, different machines. We can define a tested application if we're using desktop or mobile testing. So we can just define a reference to our executable, whether it's our EXE, IPA, or APK. And for BDD files, we can import and work with BDD files within test completion. We can create Cucumber and BDD files within test complete also, but if you have some existing ones, we can import them and work with them. So I'll cancel this. I'm going to open an existing project to show what it looks like. So you'll notice now on the left-hand side, this is populated with some items. Our Project Explorer. We have a project suite. So a project suite can be one or more projects. And I have one project here called Shop Q18. Okay. Underneath, we have some what we call repositories. Okay. So we have our execution plan, which defines our executable items. So once we create our tests, we can group them in little test packs or basically executable items. And we can then reference them in CI/CD tools or even through test complete to run them in groups. We have our keyword test repository, where all of our tests that we either record or manually create are stored there. We have our name mapping repository here, which is our object library. Everything that we recognize, everything we create in test complete is stored here, and we can maintain reference that there. And because I define my scripting language, we have a script repository here. So any scripting that I want to do, they'll all be stored in scripts here. And this is a Python project I defined out. So this is a Python script file that's stored here. And then most importantly, underneath, we have our logs. So we have any of our tests that we run or groups of tests. We have logs that we can export to different formats and we can reference, and they are full of detail. We can go through that when we go through our test. So the best thing to do, I go ahead and record a basic test and we can see what that looks like. I'll hit record test right now in my open project. Test complete will minimize itself, and we're left here with our test complete widget that's active in record mode. We can pause or stop at any time, and we can add checkpoints or assertions to our tests. So I'm going to open my browser, open my Chrome browser, and I'm going to navigate to my shop. I have a demonstration shop here that I'll use for demonstration purposes. So here's my shop. I'll log in. And you'll notice as I move around the application, objects are highlighted with a red box, and that shows that the engine is recognizing different objects on the page. We can add assertions or actions with them. So I just use my super secret login to log into my shop. We're logged in. So say, for example, I want to record a basic workflow where I search for an item and then I validate that the right item was returned. So I have a search bar up here in my top right. Hit that. I'm going to enter my Xbox, submit, and I can see my Xbox is returned. So as I move around, as I said, things are recognized. You might notice a blue cross over each item. That means I can add a quick checkpoint. So say things like simple assertion, like whether it contains the right text, whether it's enabled, or I can add other properties here where I can add assertions versus all of the attributes of that item. Or I can also use my checkbox, my checkpoint wizard in my widget. So if I click that, we're given other options. So I can use my base assertions like text or property, the simple assertions. I can assert against an image. So for example, my Xbox is displayed here. I can take a screenshot of that, store it in my project, then use that in my test going ahead to assert a different image or a stage is there. I can assert against a file. I can have a table or grid stored in my project, maybe a table of some generation data that test can generate. Or I can connect to a database and use that for my connection. With our IQ add-on, we can also add web metrics, so basically performance metrics. I just want to check that our search term was returned. So I'm going to click on text or property. And then we're asked what object you want to check against. So I have two options here. I can either point and click, or I can drag a target. I can drag my target over here. You see all of my web model is being recognized. I'll just drop it on my result bar here. It gives me a preview. It has recognized it. It's given an internal name to that object. Underneath there, we have some objects that it's recognized, some locators. We don't need to worry about that because they're stored in our name mapping. I click next, and it's asked us what data do I want to check. So I just want to check that this contains Xbox. Now this is important because I want to actually extend this with some data-driven testing after this test. So I'm just going to extend a simple string Xbox. I could check any other attribute here also, or I can check more properties. And it gives me all of the available attributes of that element available to us there to check against. We just need to check the select box and it gets added to the list. We also, again, with our IQ add-on, we can use OCR, optical character recognition. So if this was an image, a flat image, we can also work with that. We can recognize the text using the Google OCR API, and we can recognize the text from that. We can also perform OCR actions. So if you're working with graphical elements and maybe a flat image application or a website, we can perform actions on things like that too. I use the base assertion. I'll finish that now. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So I'm going to close my browser, stop my test. This will compile my actions now. And you'll see we have a list of actions on elements that we've recognized. So we've opened our browser, Chrome. We've worked with all these different objects here. These elements are interactions that we had with them. Click, set text, click button. Even adds certain weights if you want. These are always dynamic weights. It's important to note as well. We don't have static weights. We can add static weights in test complete. We don't use them by default. We have any values in it. So my login, for example, and my password, you know, is stored in a secure variable. That's like a hidden item. And we have a description generated for each item that is any action that was done. As I move to the test, you might notice as well in the bottom, we have our visualizer panel, which is quite useful for any complex workflows or anything that is unclear. So for example, my search bar that I use there, it's named as text box item. So that's just the name of the element, but that's not very clear to me. So if I want, I can right click that and open it in my name mapping editor, which is my object repository. immediately go to that item. It's listed in my tree. These are the locators used, so there's a mixture of CSS and XPath locators. And we can maintain these here. I can change the name of this. So I'll call that search. It'll ask me to update the test and say yes. That'll update my tests. Just about the name mapping, it's important to note here. These aren't static, so I can change these. I can add or remove these locators. The great robustness about these is it goes in order. So when it's recognizing, it'll recognize the first item, but if that's changed or not visible or not available for whatever reason, it'll fail over to the second, third, fourth, in this case, 7 items. It has 7 chances to recognize items during runtime. So that creates a real robustness to my test. But if you're developing your web application and you're building out your application, if for some reason you do a massive overhaul and you've changed your items, you can easily add or edit objects through the same method. So I can click on add object and literally just drag my target onto a new object and re-recognize that without having to know any locators or any code. I can just recognize that object and add it to my repository. Cancel that. I'll save what I did there, and you'll see now my test is updated, where it's referencing my search field and it's entered that item there. Okay, just minimize this out of the way for a view. We can edit any of these, so I can click on any operation. Say if I record in Chrome and recognize that, but I can select any browser that's installed on my machine, or I can parameterize it, or I can also create what's called a browser loop and loop through every browser on my machine and test the same application through all my browsers. I'm going to change this to Edge for now. I have another action. I have an erroneous click here. I didn't mean to click, so I'll just delete that. For example, anything else there. I have my property checkpoint there where I add my checkpoint, and we have our browser closed. Okay, so if I run this now, it'll run in Edge. Open up my application, go through the same steps. Wonderful. So within 9 seconds, we run our test, a simple workflow. We have our test log is presented to us. It notes all of our steps that we did and also has a visual reference, expected versus actual. The expected is what was recorded, and the actual is what was happened in runtime. Okay. If there's for any reason there's an issue or a defect, or maybe even just something you want to create over this, we can connect to our Jira. If you have a Jira instance, we can create a Jira issue. I think I've logged in here already. Oh yeah, I can link that. And directly from our project, I can connect to my Jira and I can create any kind of task I want from that. I can include my log that's here, our system log if I want. And I can add it directly to my Jira backlog and opens up once I create that. We can also export this to HTML or MHT files, compiled file that can be shared amongst your team. You don't need Test Complete to open those. And we can also create issues and other issue tracking. We have documentation how to create templates for other issue tracking software. That's one test. Say I want to extend this test, this simple workflow, and I want to work with different data sets, right? So I want to search maybe for different items and really stretch my data. So I can highlight my events that I used to search for my Xbox. I can right-click that, and I can make a data loop and do some data-driven testing. So to do that, I just need to create a variable that will store some data for me. I'll create the default one called var1. I can drive it from Excel, a CSV, a database table, or a table variable. So a table that stored my project that may have even generated data. Like for now, I'll use CSV because I have a CSV file. I'll just select my file. It's a common generic file, so I just select that. Simple search terms, Xbox, iPhone, TV. Use my records. And I'll need to tell the test then where in these events do I want to use these. So I want to change where I set the text, the search term to be my search term. And then in my checkpoint, I want to change the value it asserts against to the same value. So this test now will send that search term into my test and check that the same value has been returned in my checkpoint. Okay. So if I run this now, it automatically saves. It'll pull up my application. And it can iterate through the different values in my sheet, validate against them. So that's a very simple workflow, but you could very easily create very complex and useful scenarios with that. Okay, so you can see that the values entered in my log, my checkpoints were passed. Okay, so that's our data-driven testing in a nutshell. One more thing I want to cover off have a question in here in chat. I just noticed. Apologies for that. Can I schedule the test to run them automatically at a particular time? Yes, great. Okay, so I was going to cover modularization very simply. What I'm going to do is I'll show you an example. So any of these line items, say my login step here, these can be moved. So I can copy this out of my test and I can move it to a new step. Here's one I made earlier, as you say. And here's just the basic login steps for my test. Why is that useful? So when I go into another test here, so add a blue repair, all I need to do is drag that into my test and I have those steps right there. I can be modularized through my tests and I can edit them in one place. So maybe if I'm logging as different users or logging into different environments, I have one place and one bit of functionality I can modularize and use across my test. So that's modularization in a nutshell. So to get to the CI/CD part of things, so to answer your question, where can I schedule them? Yes, you can. So there's several ways you can do that. The main reason I will look at is through our execution plan. So say you've built out your project and we have some tests that we have created and you want to create your test pack now for your release or your sprint, you would go into your execution plan and you can create test items here. And these are executable items containing your tests. And these can contain many items. So like basic keyword tests I have here, which can also work with things like tags. I can tag different tests with a tag. I would create a tag called core functionality. And any test with that tag now will run under this release 1.0 banner. Same with keyword tests, same with any scripts. If I have scripts in my test, I can add them and I can say maybe something like this where I'm setting baseline data. I can add that to my test and run it there. How is that useful in CI/CD? You can use in Jenkins or any CI/CD tool. You can use a command line interface you want. You would reference this release 1.0 item and then run that either through maybe your Windows scheduler using command line, or you could run it through Jenkins and extend it that way. So if I open my Jenkins, I can show you. I have a build here, my test complete. Build that now, but I can configure it. So you would link you could drop your files to a drive, or you could link to an SEM tool like Git. I've linked my Git here. So you just link standard way of linking Git in your Jenkins. You can set build triggers. So after a certain build, another build is done, or you can set a schedule to build periodically. And then in my build, I just have a test complete plugin. I tell it what project to run, and I want to tell it to run the release 1.0 object. That will then run that object, and it will generate my reports for me. There's different methods of exporting reports, but very simply, the base method is just within Jenkins. You can generate your files. You can download them from here, or you can set up Jenkins to export them to you. Same with your command line interface. If it's a Windows scheduler, you can generate your files, have them sent in different formats to you, including JUnit. You can export JUnit results. I hope that answered your question. There's another one. I have noticed that you support IE and Edge, HTML-based. You support Edge Chromium. Yes, we do. We support all major browsers, to be honest. So yeah, we do support Edge Chromium, absolutely. And for Chromium browsers in particular, you saw there I recorded my test in Chrome also. We have regular patches too for browsers, so we're all the time releasing patches. Yeah, so you can see here all the time for different versions, we're releasing different patches for every subversion of different browsers. Okay. Where was I in that? So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell where I was with that. So you can see where we created our tests, create your very simple workflows or your base workflows very quickly, your core workflows. You can modularize your tests. You can pull out the different steps. You can create snippets of functionality that you can drag and drop through different tests and reuse them. Oh yes, so these tests you can see are made up of these line items, these object events, these actions. We have many, many more. So within our central operations panel here, here's my frequently used ones. We can add things like running a script routine. So if you do some scripting, like some setup or something, you can drag that into your test and very quickly just run a certain bit of a script. You can do image-based actions, add checkpoints. You can run different applications, do different on-screen actions. So for example, any action here I've added, depending on, it's contextual to the object, but you can select different methods like weighting properties, check if it's enabled, things like that. Many, many different methods there for you to use. Sebastian, is there an agent which can be deployed, for example, in a Docker container to execute the test on that particular environment? Yes, great question. So test complete is our creation tool, right? So it's where we create and we maintain all of our tests. We have another tool that can be included with it called test execute, which is our test runner. And that's a lightweight tool. It just runs tests. It doesn't do anything else. And you can drop that in your Docker container, for example, or you can drop it on a VM or another machine on your network. And you can connect that to your Jenkins instance or have it run standalone. It uses what's called a floating license. So it's only using a license when it's in use. And that will run your test on that machine. And depending how you configure it, it will export your test results back to you. So that's test execute as opposed to test complete. So yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sebastian. Logs, yes, very important. So our actionable items that we called in our my presentation there. So I opened one of our logs here, and this is a log. If I click on summary, this is a log of 5 tests that I ran on my machine earlier. Took 50 seconds. So you see we have some information on that. Each one of these, we can drill down into these tests, and we have the same log that we have in the application. This is also can be exported in Jenkins. Show you Jenkins. Same there. So it's the same thing in your browser window. Again, you don't need test complete for this. These can be exported to different formats, like I said, to Jira, for example, or different issue tracking systems, or you can export them if you choose to the command line in JUnit format, and that gives you your information there. The great thing about these is you have your list of steps, and you have your expected versus actual. So say if there's an error here, you're working with a complex workflow or a complex application, you have your expected and your actual image. It immediately gives you an idea of where your application should be and what happened where it wasn't, basically. And it's quite useful for debugging. In reference to debugging also, we support debugging in actual code, so in the tests. So at any point here, I can add breakpoints, and that will automatically say pause my test at that action that is happening there, and I can debug and test that way through there. To extend further, if you wanted to, you could also convert your test. So if you want to, say, work in scripting, you can convert. You can right-click any test to convert it to script. I can add a new there for tests. I can add that there. I can choose to add comments, and it automatically will generate then with my breakpoints. This is set up in Python, and it automatically generates my Python script, and I can reference my test that way. And then you can also cut and paste, copy, chop and change whichever way you want to use this that way. Okay. Extending test complete then for other items. Maybe you're using things like API tests or such. So I can right-click my project and I can add a repository. I can add different things, like I can add Android gestures for working on Android applications, images. I can add some manual tests if I want that I've collected, or I can add some API tests that I've created. I can add a reference so I can run them directly from my tests or my execution plan. I can add web services, and I can add Selenium tests. So if you have Selenium tests that you've already maybe started stepping into automation, you don't lose that. You can use your Selenium tests in test complete. I can add there. So DUnit, JUnit, etc. NUnit, PyUnit, test in G. So if I have test in G there, you just specify your project or your class path, and you can run your Selenium test directly from test complete. Sebastian, again, thank you. Do test complete provide any performance check add-on for communication during test executions? Yes, we do. So using our IQ add-on, so that's the intelligent quality add-on, you can add some base performance checks. So there's things like web metrics, performance. Forgive me, it slipped my mind now. But there are web audits. You can get feedback on your performance of your web application during runtime. That's for web applications. We don't have the same for desktop applications, I'm afraid. At least not yet. But you can add those through your wizard. So if I go to my wizard, check my wizard. Drop it in there, and you can see here there's the web metrics, and we can pass the URL, and then we can set different things like performance, accessibility. It can give you a best practices score, SEO score, or progressive score. Okay. Great. Thanks for that. Okay, so any other questions? So I'm open the floor to any questions you may have now. Cesare, do you support usage of external apps such as SQL stored procedures? Yes, you can. So what you could do is you could very easily just leverage the scripting functionality and you work with external store procedures, right? So if you're if you're needing to use SQL store procedures, if you're needing to work with a database, you can also create database connections and run and create database queries that you can run within Test Complete. But by all means, you can leverage the scripting functionality here, create a method, create even a whole unit file that you can leverage and call those procedures, store them in files. So for example, here I have an example where I am working with an external file here in this Python method, where we load a file using our internal methods there for AQ file, read whole text file. I can do string measures on that. You could run your store procedure the same way, extract that data, and then you assign that variable then to a variable, like I've done here, and use that then within your testing. So it's very extensible if you start using the variable values, where you can set and get different variables. So yes, you could. If you want, you could. We can connect to that afterwards if you want to go deep dive into that. Janice, can I run my Selenium test in Test Complete? Yes, you can. So here, for example, I right click on my project and I click on add, not run. And you click on Selenium unit testing. This adds your unit testing repository here, and obviously that can be renamed. You can add different values to that. So, for Selenium test ng, you could add JUnit, MS test, NUnit, PHP, PyUnit, add all of these. And then for test ng, for example, you can specify your Maven project and you can run classes or you can run all your tests. And then that, excuse me, that can then be added to your execution plan if you wish to run that as part of your chain through. But if you've got your CMS, you could easily run that through Jenkins too. But if you want to include it as part of your project, yeah, you can do that. Thank you for that. Any other questions, guys? Oh, okay. Michael, I don't know if you have any questions, or is there anything else that you would like to maybe cover off? I think in terms of the agenda, I've covered kind of where I wanted to go with that in terms of creating your base workflows, having test reports, and then automating it through a workflow. So you can see quite quickly you could run and have very quick feedback on your core workflows, right?
If we don't have any other questions, I think we'll be going to the end. So let me summary in Polish. Sorry, Michael.
Sure.
Także dziękuję Państwu bardzo za udział w dzisiejszej prezentacji. Chcę też powiedzieć, że ta sesja dzisiejsza była nagrywana, także wszyscy uczestnicy dzisiejszego webinarium, także dostaniecie, jak tylko ukończymy to nasze ociosamy to nagranie, skończymy kompilację, zostanie wysłany do Państwa link, także będzie można sobie do tych wiadomości wrócić w wygodnym dla Państwa czasie. Także dziękuję Państwu bardzo. I can see we have another question from Ernest.
Okay, Ernest, thank you. Is it possible to send a test log by email or attach to the application in Jira? Yes, you can. So in Jira, so if you're attaching it from your log, you can just create your Jira issue. So this is directly from a log. I connect to my Jira instance, give it the credentials, and you select your project, and then when you create whatever task you want to create, task, epic, subtask, bug story, you can add your test complete log, or you can choose to also add a system log if you wish, and that will automatically create that. So if I create one now, for example, hopefully this works. Let's call it ASDF. to directly post it to my Jira. And ask me to open it, I will. And this is my Jira. So then it posted to my Jira, and you see the logs are automatically added there. And that's my backlog now, so you can just add it to whatever you want after that. Subsequent to that, yes, there are other methods. If you want to directly say part of your CI/CD runtime, there's methods you can add. We have what's called the send mail method. It's very easy just to add it by a script, and you can add it to whatever way you want to configure it. You can also export directly from test complete. You can send by email here. There's a button, and that will initiate your email process if you want to do it manually. But we can do it manually. We can automate it whatever way you wish. The automatic process at the end of the test. Yes, you can configure test complete to email anywhere you want after the test. So what you would do is you would create a method, a script method, and we have it available on our website. It's a very simple method. You would just add to your test, and then in your execution plan, you would add it as a line item here. So if I click this, click on script, and I would have a method here say this is send mail, and whatever way I've configured it, it'll add that script. It'll run that script at the end of my testing. Then it'll automate after your tests are completed. Okay. Good question. Thanks, Ernest.
Okay, guys. Do you have any last-minute question?
Hey, great. Thanks, guys. This is a really good and really active session, so I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. So I wish you all guys the pleasant rest of the day, and I hope we can hear you soon in terms of other questions or maybe licensing models, which I hope
Yes.
so. And right. So hear you soon in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.